Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to hold talks with top Saudi Arabian leaders as part of a three-day visit to the country focused on energy ties. He arrived in the capital Riyadh with much pomp. Several Saudi Air Force fighter jets escorted Mr. Xi's plane as it entered the country's airspace. And the president also greeted with a 21-gun salute. His trip will feature bilateral meetings with Saudi King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. A number of agreements are also expected to be signed, and the visit comes as Riyadh expands its global alliances beyond long-standing ties with the West. China is Saudi Arabia's top oil customer. And for more analysis, we're joined by Professor Neda Hashemi, Director at the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver. Professor, Xi Jinping's trip comes at a delicate moment in U.S.-Saudi ties. How would you characterize Riyadh's strategic calculation in cementing Beijing as a crucial economic partner?
Well, I think there's a lot of exaggeration in the media coverage of this story, somehow suggesting that Saudi Arabia is reorienting its strategic and security alliance away from the United States and toward China. I think the fundamental security relationship, arms and weapon sales relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and the larger, political relationship that exists between the United States and Saudi Arabia, which goes back, to World War II, that hasn't really changed. I think what's changed is a growing sort of confidence and arrogance by this new Saudi crown prince, who aspires to be this global leader, and particularly this deep anger that the Saudi crown prince has, not at the United States in total, but specifically at the Democratic Party and Joe Biden for talking about human rights issues and for criticizing, Saudi human rights abuses, not just within Saudi Arabia, but also regionally, particularly in Yemen, and especially in the context of the assassination and brutal murder of the Saudi dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So with that as a backdrop, I think this expanding relationship with China, this reception, very sort of flowering and ostentatious reception that we're seeing today in Saudi Arabia given to the Chinese president, is really trying to send a message to the United States that you better give us what we want, you better tone down your human rights criticism, or else we are going to, go through the motions of shifting towards Saudi Arabia. I think that's fundamentally what's happening, and that's the core of, this meeting that we're seeing today in Saudi Arabia. Now, there's other things going on as well. I think there is a global sort of authoritarian alliance that we're seeing. Fundamentally, Saudi Arabia and China have shared values, and those are shared values rooted in authoritarianism, disdain for democracy, censoring the internet, not talking about human rights questions like the horrific genocide of the Uyghurs in China. And so that's sort of the shared worldview that, these leaders have. And so those are my, fundamental sort of thoughts on what's happening today in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so let's look at the Biden administration, which is, of course, watching this trip very closely. What aspect of this deepening China-Saudi relationship do you think concerns Washington the most in terms of the economy and, of course, security, as you mentioned?
Well, I think it has to do with arms and weapons sales. Now, there's some reports that there's been an expansion of Saudi purchasing Chinese weapons. I think if that starts to take place in any significant way, it would set off alarm bells in Washington, D.C. One of the core aspects of the Saudi-American relationship is this understanding that Saudi Arabia will sell its oil on the international market, and then it will take a large chunk of the profits made and reinvest it in the American economy, particularly in the arms industry. There's a huge sort of arsenal and network of lobbyists and influential policymakers who are very much their careers are devoted to maintaining this relationship rooted in arms sales. So if there's a sort of a significant shift, if Saudi Arabia, for whatever reason, decides to sort of start to purchase high-tech Chinese airplanes, weapons technology, anti-aircraft, tanks, stuff like that, then that will, I think, deeply concern and set off alarm bells in the White House, and there will be a major response from the Biden administration towards Saudi Arabia.
Now, Professor, one last question. Officials say that a number of agreements are expected to be signed, so we're watching out for those. So which ones are significant that we should pay attention to apart from arms deal security, because 5G is also an issue?
Yeah, so there'll be sort of internet network expansion. There'll be a lot of, economic infrastructure deals that will be signed. This new Saudi crown prince has, these aspirations to, develop Saudi Arabia into a major tourist destination. And so, the Chinese investment in those types of expenditures, I think, will take place. I don't think they will necessarily alarm Washington D.C. But like I said, if the arms relationship shifts from the United States toward China, that will suggest that there's a fundamental crisis in U.S. Saudi relations, and there will be a response from the United States.
Professor, thank you very much for your insights. Pleasure speaking with you. Professor Neda Hashemi, Director at the Center for Middle East Studies at the University of Denver.